welcome to episode 5 of the Terra Parva show. I'm your host, Chase Jennings, and today we're going to be talking about fungi. So if you love mushrooms, whether it be to eat them like I do, or to just observe their beauty, well, this is the episode for you. So I do love to eat mushrooms. I love to get my dose of D3 from them. I'd rather get from them than through the ionizing, cell-destroying, melanoma-causing radiation of the sun that eventually irradiates us and kills us. But anyways, that's just me. But a lot of people love to observe these mushrooms growing in their vivariums or terrariums, and they ask, how did they get in there? Well, it's just like they get anywhere. Life will find a way. Typically, these are going to start from just a single cyst or a single spore. And these spores can be carried in the air, they can be carried on you, they can be carried in the substrate that you put into those glass containers, they can be carried on the plants, or they can be carried through water that you're misting those tanks with. There's a lot of different ways they get in there. But any way you go about it, once those spores get in there, if they're allowed to germinate and they're allowed to grow, excuse me, then the really cool thing is you may eventually have some mushrooms depending on the particular species. Now, not all fungi will fruit. And when you see the mushrooms, you have to remember that that is like seeing the apples on a tree. You're seeing the apples, you're not seeing the tree. The fungus is something that we typically don't see, the main body of it rather. But if you lift up some leaf litter or you lift up a piece of wood, you may see what looks kind of like a spider web of sorts, these white strands, and that's actually the body of the fungus itself. And again, when you're seeing mushrooms, it's just the reproductive mechanism. It's just, again, like the fruit on a tree, essentially, something that helps it reproduce. Now, fungi are really amazing. They're actually some of the largest organisms on the entire planet. You heard that right. There are some fungi that are as large as several square miles. These are particularly mycorrhizal fungi. They have a symbiotic relationship with trees in forests. And these fungi, the really cool thing about it is they've done a lot of studies to show that they can actually communicate with the trees. So if you have trees that are being infected by, let's say, a pine beetle infestation on one side, the trees on the other side can somehow, through the mycelial strands, tell that those trees are being infected and start producing more sap, more terpenes to then fight off those pine beetles that are going to then eventually spread to them and start attacking them. It's very, very fascinating how trees can communicate with each other with fungus. But really, when we're building a terrarium or vivarium, fungi are such an integral part that is so often overlooked. And people really only notice them when they see the reproductive function of them, the mushrooms. But if you think about it, the main cleanup crew of your bioactive vivarium or terrarium is going to be the fungi and the bacteria. If you have no springtails, if you have no isopods, well, a lot of the heavy lifting is going to be done by the fungi and by the bacteria. And even when you do have springtails and isopods, they're going to be doing the cleanup work that the other organisms are not doing for you. Now, I made this beneficial microbial inoculant, particularly for seeing your vivarium with a known array of microbes, both fungi and bacteria. They're going to live in a symbiotic relationship with your plants and with your animals. You have to think about your vivarium or terrarium as being kind of like a war zone. And you want all that territory to be occupied by allies, by friendly fungi and bacteria, so that they can fight and kill off any kind of harmful fungi or bacteria that may get into your vivarium. Because again, you're going to constantly have bacterial cysts and fungal spores to be getting into your vivarium through the air, through your skin, through water, through tools, through decor, everything that you can imagine. And the best thing is for most of those spores and cysts to be destroyed by the mycotoxins and consumed by the fungi and bacteria that is already established in that tank, the beneficial strains that you select. Otherwise, if you do not inoculate your vivarium, you are essentially playing roulette with the microbes in there. You have no idea what you're actually going to end up getting, and you just hope that whatever you get will be a beneficial combination. So far as mycorrhizal fungi, we have talked about two particular types, and that's going to be ectomycorrhizal and endomycorrhizal. Again, you're not typically going to be seeing any fruiting bodies from these. Most mycorrhizal fungi that do fruit, and you're thinking about maybe morels, which are delicious, or chanterelles, which are also delicious, or maybe boletes, but those you actually, if you want to grow them, you have to inoculate a tree, a sapling, really, that's been sanitized, inoculate that, and then it takes several years for them to get to the point where they actually have fruiting bodies. So if you think that you're going to grow morels or chanterelles or something like that in your vivarium, well, sadly, it's just not going to happen. But these mycorrhizal fungi serve some very important roles. And again, ectomycorrhizal, they are something that's going to be forming a protective sheath around the roots of the plants. The endomycorrhizal fungi will actually be growing within the root structure itself. Both serve a similar function. They are going to be taking a little bit of the sugars from that plant, but through their vast network of hyphae, they're going to act kind of like a secondary root system, which is going to not only fend off different pathogens that may try to infect the plants. Some will actually eat nematodes, which is pretty cool. But they will also help to gather a lot of nutrients that otherwise are unavailable to those plants. And it will help those plants to grow more vigorously. And they can also protect those plants in harsh times, whether it be whether the soil chemistry is off, or whether it be that maybe the soil is getting a little bit too dry, or otherwise if the plant's getting stressed out. They're kind of like auxiliary support for the plants. So they're just so incredibly important. Now, a lot of you do want to grow mushrooms, your vivariums, and I understand that, but you have to be extremely careful because there are a lot of products out there that are not made for vivariums that can cause a lot of issues. And there are some every now and then that do get sold for vivariums or even terrariums that are just a waste of money. I've seen people sell kits that are for bioluminescent fungi, and typically these are just dowels, and they fail almost every single time. And the reason for that is because if you're taking a kit that is pre-inoculated, it's been completely sterilized where the fungi has a blank slate, there's no biological warfare it has to wage against any other types of fungi or bacteria, it can take over that kit and it can fruit. But if you're putting spores, if you're putting a liquid syringe of mycelium into your vivarium, well, it's just going to fail because it is so quickly overwhelmed by all the pre-established bacteria and fungi in that vivarium that it stands little chance to ever take hold. And actually, you have to be extremely careful because if you put a liquid fungal medium into your vivarium, that is very high in sugars, and it can actually cause a bacterial bloom that can also, unfortunately, kill your animals. So I highly recommend against using any kind of liquid cultures to inoculate your vivarium with. Now, again, a lot of people are asking, well, I mean, can the kits work? And the answer is maybe. I have seen some Panellus stypticus, although the packaging I've seen actually had a Mycenia on it, completely different species of mushroom, very misleading. It does not glow as bright as what's on the package. But anyways, nonetheless, they sell dowels to people, and people sprinkle them in their vivarium, and they completely fail. Complete waste of money. Some people will actually use them as intended, and that's where you get a newly cut piece of wood, and then you pasteurize that piece of wood and then you will drill holes into it. You will hammer those dowels into it, and then you will coat those holes with some type of either paraffin or beeswax. And then you will allow that to colonize, typically either wrapped in plastic or wet cloth, something like that, until the point at which it's ready to put into a vivarium. Otherwise, when you put a vivarium right away, it's being constantly attacked and other microorganisms are trying to colonize a piece of wood. Again, this is not, a vivarium is a very biologically diverse place. There is a lot of microorganisms there that you really don't know are there until you look under a microscope. So you need a really particular kit to actually work in a vivarium or terrarium. And I did make some kits at one time that were particularly suited for vivariums and terrariums and were safe to use in them. So here's the other pitfall that people fall into. There are a lot of mushroom companies out there that make specifically mushroom growing kits. These kits you do not want to use in your vivarium. And the reason for that is because these mushroom companies are making these kits to where they're going to have a large flush of mushrooms, particularly for eating. When you're talking about the mushroom industry, if people want to grow mushrooms at home to eat, they don't want a tiny little flush. They don't want just a few mushrooms. They want a lot of mushrooms to actually eat. Otherwise, they don't feel like they're getting their money's worth. But the problem is when you have so many mushrooms, especially if you put one of these kits in a vivarium and you have a huge amount of mushrooms, you also have a giant spore drop. If you have a giant spore drop, that's not just a matter of it getting on the glass, having to clean the spores off the glass, but it's rather a matter of if you have animals in there, because these spores in those high of numbers can cause a lot of respiratory issues for a variety of animals. Amphibians, they can actually clog up the pores of the skin of those amphibians. So you really do not ever want to use a mushroom growing kit made by the mushroom industry in your vivarium. That's why when I made them, it was a very specifically designed kit for vivariums and terrariums to have a small controlled flush of fungi, and those beautiful mushrooms can be observed without the risk of having a giant spore drop that could harm your animals. Funny enough, when you're actually growing mushrooms en masse, if you ever go to a mushroom farm, you'll see that most people have respirators on. And that's because those spores, if you breathe too many of them, you can actually get spore lung. It's a kind of a nasty disease. You don't want to breathe in too many of those spores. So anyways, guys, that's the big thing. You want to stay away from anything that is not particularly made for a vivarium or terrarium. Now, I have seen where people in terrariums, when they don't have any animals in there, they don't really care about having a giant spore drop, that they've grown mushrooms in there. And I mean, that's perfectly fine if you want to do that. Just know that also you have to be careful because a lot of times these kits will start being attacked by the local flora as well, and sometimes the fauna. The springtails and isopods love to munch on fungi. And if you think about it, springtails are fungivores. Now, I will say that when it comes to different types of fungi, and we'll kind of shift into the cleanup crew and talk about springtails too. Fungi, a lot of people, when they get them in their vivarium, they're friends and they're foes. There's these beautiful mushrooms that you would love to grow in your vivarium, but people don't like other types. And this is like flower pot fungus, Leucocoprinus bourbamii, especially some particularly aggressive strains like that were brought in over the last few years. A lot of people don't realize this, but there are so many strains of fungi out there. A blue oyster is not a blue oyster, it's not a blue oyster, it's a blue oyster. How do I explain it? So essentially, you can have one particular subspecies of fungus, and that subspecies can then be categorized into varietals. And what I mean by that is they are genetically different enough to yield different results, but genetically similar enough to not be classified as a new subspecies. So for instance, you can have a particular type of oyster that will fruit between 70 to 76 degrees, but you'll have the exact same subspecies that is a different varietal that can fruit in colder weather, about maybe 60 to 65 degrees, or a warm weather variety that can fruit in 76 to 85 degrees. You can also have different varietals that have larger or smaller fruits, or they can have different colors of fruits. If you think about the button mushrooms that you get at the store, the cremini mushrooms and the white button mushrooms, they're the exact same subspecies. They're just different varietals. So this is also where it's really important too, if somebody's inoculating kits, particularly for vivariums or terrarium use, they have to know what particular strains they are using, because that makes such a huge difference both in their success and in their safety as well. Now, again, we're talking about friends and foes so far as fungi. There's a lot of friends, but there's also some foes. Like I mentioned, Leucocapris, Burbamii, and also some different types of mold as well, which we want to keep under check, because if we don't, then again, too many spores, too many mold spores can cause health issues for both the frogs and for you. And a lot of times what happens when people set up a new vivarium, if they don't use some kind of microbial inoculant like the one that I made, then they will run into issues with certain things molding. And that's just a natural part of the ecosystem establishing. It's part of the natural cycle, because you'll have particular organisms that will be dominant at one point or another. They will overtake that particular area in the vivarium or the terrarium, or maybe overtake a particular botanical, maybe a branch, maybe a pod, and then they will get to the point at which they can reproduce. And really the best way to keep that from happening is to put a lot of different fungi and bacteria in there, so they're constantly waging war against each other, and not a single one can ever become dominant to the point at which it gets to that reproductive stage. Now, with that being said, some things are a lot more prone to molding than others. Like grapewood, for instance. Grapewood is very prone to molding. And what people will have is typically a mold that will take over the surface, because the surface is very rich in nitrogen. And then once that mold has eaten up all of the resources on the surface of that branch, then it will die back. And that's the same thing with a lot of fungi that take sort of tank. Like Leucocapris, Burbamii was another one that the original flower pot fungus, I'm not talking about the new varietals that were brought in, but the original one, it would pop up and it would go away. And what was happening was it was consuming a lot of the readily available nutrients, and then once it consumed the bulk of those readily available nutrients, that was naturally dying back. It was being kept in check by its resources. And that's a very good thing. We want that. So, but again, the easiest thing to do is have a lot of different varieties of fungi in your tank, select the particular varietals that you want, and then they will help to keep each other in check. That way, instead of having one that just dominates everything, there are all these small warring factions that keep each other in line, essentially. Anyways, I hope you guys learned some things today. I hope you guys also enjoy fungi as much as I do. If y'all have any questions about it, please feel free to send me an email. I'd be happy to answer those individual questions. But I'll look forward to talking to you guys on the next one. Have a good day.